Right. So hi again. As you'll see from our PowerPoint here, my name's Laura. Sandra's going to be speaking after me. We've got a bit of a double act going on with our part of the presentation, and then Stuart's going to be jumping in just after us to explain a bit more about travel insurance to you. He worked in the travel insurance industry, so he knows a lot more about it than the rest of us do. I think certainly more than me and Sandra anyway. You might think 32 years is my age. I'm actually 36. I've had diabetes, type 1 diabetes for 32 years now. But Sandra is a diabetes veteran. I mean, she's had it for around about 60 years now. So yeah, I won't ask Sandra to say how old she is or anything, but certainly I'm very impressed by that amount of time managing the condition. I'd love to make it to 60 years myself, but we'll see when I get there. Yeah, so I use insulin like Sandra. I use the Novorapid Levemir pen injections, and Sandra's using a pump. So I'm going to talk more about traveling with insulin from a vial and pen perspective, and Sandra will look a little bit more about traveling with the pump. And I think, Diana, you are also a pump user, as far as I understand. That's right, yeah. So yes. So you get lots of information on traveling with the pump. Sadly, I'm not qualified to talk about that, but the others are. So hopefully you'll get a nice variety of information from us. And obviously questions are welcome anywhere through the talk, or particularly at the end of mine, Sandra, and Stuart's part, and then at the end of Diana's part, as far as I understand. So we'll be happy to answer questions, and some have already come in your registration, so thanks for those. And yeah, we'll definitely be dealing with those once we've done the more formal part of the presentation. So I'll move swiftly onwards. Intro to the evening I've kind of already done. It's not the evening, sorry. When we did this presentation, it was originally an evening presentation. I didn't notice in the PowerPoint that I said evening rather than morning, but just ignore that. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about traveling in hot and cold climates in particular. Sandra will then talk about traveling more in other continents, changing time zones, traveling with the pump. Then it'll come back to me. I'll give you the lowdown on my top 10 travel tips. So for days when you're going through airport security, international rail security, and kind of what I would suggest for those experiences. Obviously, I'm sure you've all got your own great wealth of experience in this field as well. So, I mean, whether you travel to the next town or whether you travel internationally or to other continents, we're really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say as well, because, I mean, we're not the only experts here in the room by any means. So, you know, certainly don't think that because we're giving a few examples, it means that we know everything, because we're still learning ourselves as well. So there you go. And then obviously Stuart will talk about insurance. And then Diana has had the most amazing adventures and experiences, and just heard you doing triathlon as well. So I'm very, very humbled and impressed. And that's something I wouldn't be embarking on myself at all. But, you know, is it type 1 you're living with, Diana, as well? Or yeah, type 1. So yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to your part of the presentation, and my husband's going to jump in and join our group for your part of the presentation, because I said he could learn quite a lot for, you know, your experiences and adventures, and, you know, what traveling with me might also entail. He's already watched the start of our presentation when we presented to the Southwest Diabetes UK Group a few months back. So this is kind of the second edition of the same talk. So what qualifies me to talk about travel? Well, I mean, like any of you, everyone travels all the time, but I tend to do it just that little bit more because I've been living in Brussels. I'm joining from Brussels in Belgium today. I've been living in Brussels since 2009. So any journey to see my family and friends from home, my friends from school, my friends from uni, pretty much involves an international journey. So more often than not, I'm taking the Eurostar between Brussels and London, and then taking the train from Paddington down south, because my family are based in Devon. But I studied in Bristol, so hence why I'm also involved with the Bristol Diabetic Group that Sandra tends to manage and run. So that's how Sandra and I got in contact through the Southwest section of Diabetes UK, which I think is now something like South and Central, or Sandra would know better than me. So just to show you what's in the picture here, that's the atomium. That was built for the 1958 World Exhibition in Brussels. It's a kind of atom-shaped thing with museums and exhibitions inside that you can visit, and a restaurant up the top, which I've eaten in twice. It's pretty cool. It looks modern now, even though it's already over 50 years old. In the center, you see the Arc Cinquantenaire. It's a bit like the Brandenburger Gate or the Arc de Triomphe, but the Brussels version, and that's the Belgian flag, for those of you who might not recognize it, flying there. I quite like that. It's 10 minutes walk from my house. And to the right, you see me by the Brussels flower carpet. That's every 2 years that we get flowers. They call it the tapis des fleurs in French, where they make a flower carpet and there's a different theme each time. So there, the theme was the EU. I mean, very topical for Brussels. But each year it's different. And that's the Grand Place, which is the most famous square in the center of Brussels. If any of you have ever been to Belgium, you probably recognize it, or you've probably seen it on some occasion, because there's not a lot to see touristically in Brussels, apart from the Grand Place in particular. So yeah, anyway, that's just to give you a bit of background about me and my adventures since 2009. I've also traveled a lot. I mean, I was diagnosed when I was 3. I started traveling on my own when I was 11. And I went to stay in host families in Spain, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, France, from the age 11 up until about age 18. And that's how I ended up then studying languages. And that involved living in France for half a year, living in Germany for half a year. And then it took me to the EU, which we're not going to go into detail about because it's too controversial, I would say, as a topic. I'm not working there at the moment, but I was a translator at the European Commission for about 4 years, and I worked in multilingualism policy for 3 years, like dealing with schools and universities and everything in the field of languages, because I love languages and I'm quite outgoing, I'd say. Anyway, so I mean, those are the countries that I have links with. I mean, from the flags, there's Belgium, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, UK. Obviously, I lived in England for about the first 21 years of my life, and Switzerland. I popped to and stayed with a host family there. So some people were asking questions about traveling as a child. So I mean, if anyone's got any more specific questions about what it involves traveling when you're young, I'd be happy to answer those questions after the presentation. Likewise, someone also asked a specific question about traveling in Spain. I can elaborate on that further later on, but in particular, it's difficult meal times. The food is very different amounts of carbs. And it's juggling that I struggled with the most when I stayed with a host family in Spain on a few occasions, and when I did language courses in Salamanca and Madrid. Yeah, so I can cover that more later if you're interested, but you know, let's move on with the presentation. I'll talk to you now about traveling to hot and cold climates and how I've dealt with those challenges with my insulin in particular. And I've got some pretty photos. So some like it hot. Let's look at the hot climates first. That was when I went to Morocco. It was a great trip for my mum's 50th birthday, and we traveled about 10,000 kilometers on a tour bus. It was all organized, so it was a really easy trip in that respect, that we didn't need to deal with all the bookings of the hotels and the transfers and all that sort of thing. So in the photos, you can see me in the high Atlas Mountains on the top left. Down the bottom, you've got the tanneries. I've forgotten which city. It might have been Fez. But it was one of the cities that we visited, about 10, 11 different cities in Morocco. And it was a great trip. In the middle, you could see some piles of spices in the market, which were, you know, the market was amazing. The flavors, the colors. I mean, you had to haggle all the time, which was tricky because you're not used to doing that in England, really. But, you know, some of the prices were extortionate if you didn't haggle. So you really learned quickly that that was what you had to do. And to the right, bottom right, is me by the Hassan II Mosque in Casablanca. It's one of 2 mosques in Morocco that's actually open to non-Muslims. It was built by the King Hassan II, who wanted to share the Islamic culture with the Western world and other nations and people who didn't necessarily share the same faith as him. So it's very palatial inside, very beautiful. Here's me camel riding in the Sahara on that Morocco trip. I quite like this picture because it shows my diabetic supplies on the front of the camel. We weren't able to carry backpacks or handbags on the camel, but we were told to put our bag in the front, which was great because they said if you need to access your camera. But I mean, obviously, as you would probably all know with diabetes, you need to be able to access dextrose tablets or snacks or testing kits or whatever it might be. So I stuck my diabetic supplies in that bag, which is why it's quite bulky and quite full, as always. You'd know yourselves that being diabetic, you have to carry so many supplies everywhere all the time in case of A, B, C, D happening, and it's a nightmare. But anyway, you do what you can. So that was me with my Moroccan adventures with the diabetic supplies. I think Diana has traveled to Morocco and South Africa and all sorts of exciting places, far more than me. So I mean, she'll tell you more about such exciting adventures when we get to her part of the presentation. But here, how to keep the insulin cool. I say in the Stone Age, because back when I was about 3, 4, 10, 11, I used to use cool bags to transport my insulin on travel days. Which was not ideal because, as you'll probably already know, after a couple of hours, the ice thaws, the insulin gets hot, and you're not keeping it below 10 degrees or 8 degrees or whatever you're meant to be doing with the insulin when it's not in use. So, I mean, tricky. I've got 3 different cool bags. They're all mine. I took the photo. I would say the Actifruits cool bag is the very worst. It's very, very thin lining. So again, it heats up way too quickly. The Anchor one is quite pretty. My mum got it for me, but it's not quite as good as the Polar Gear. The Polar Gear one, the blue one, it has a thicker lining, is higher quality. So I mean, if you're traveling with your insulin supplies, get the best quality that you can afford, because it will just be worth it, because you don't want the hassle of your insulin getting too hot, or, you know, we'll get on to it getting too cold, because I went to the Arctic as well, so I'm going to talk about that afterwards. To the right, you've got the standard cool blocks. They're very bad for transporting insulin, in my opinion. Obviously, the others will have something to say about it as well, probably. I used to always use standard cool blocks. I've now discovered that alternative cooling options could be a compress that you'd use, like if you break your wrist and need something to help reduce the pain. That's one option. It stays frozen a little bit longer than the standard cool block in my estimations. To the right, I've got Techni Ice. It's kind of got powder inside it. It's activated with water and crystals, and then it claims that it stays frozen for 24 to 48 hours. Now, it doesn't necessarily always manage that long, in my experiences of traveling, but it does a lot better than standard cool blocks. So if you want to travel with a cool bag, try and get your hands on some Techni Ice. I got it from Lakeland in Exeter. Quite a few years ago. I think they've now stopped supplying it, so you might have to look online to find Techni Ice. But Sandra and I did some research when we did our original presentation about half a year ago, and it looked like it was still possible to find it, I don't know, on Amazon or eBay or something like that. So I know Sandra had a list of useful links that she shared with people last time round, I think. So we might be able to share that with you after this presentation as well, if Lindsay's happy to email that across. Voila, and here's my favorite thing, and Sandra's favorite thing as well, for traveling with insulin in hot countries, the FreeOpack. You just can't beat it at the moment in our estimations. Diana, I don't know if you're also a FreeOpack user. Yeah, very good. I'm sure a lot of you have already discovered it. You can get them at local chemists for about 12 to 20 pounds each. They come in all shapes and sizes, as you can see, a variety of exciting colors, and they're designed specifically to carry insulin pens in insulin pen shape, or you can get a pump shaped one, or one shaped like an insulin vial you see in the photo there. They're brilliant. If you haven't discovered them, again, it's a kind of crystally powder activated with water for about 10 minutes. And then you have to dry it off with a towel for about a further 10 minutes, and then they'll keep your insulin cool for about, I don't know, 1 to 2 days, or even longer if you're lucky. So Sandra's traveled in really, really hot climates a lot, and she's also told me that FreeOpacks were what she used all the time, whereas I use a combination of cool bags and FreeOpacks, because if I'm traveling with lots of boxes of insulin, I can't fit them all in my FreeOpacks. So then I take a cool bag in my hand luggage backpack and a FreeOpack in my handbag, or, you know, backpack as well, with my insulin that I'm currently using for my night insulin and day insulin. I mean, you live and learn. I mean, you'll experiment, and I'm sure everyone knows their best tips of what works for them. Here, I say the future's bright, because in the past, everything was grey and bland and black in terms of insulin and diabetic equipment. Now FreoPack is another Nordisk or whichever, no, I've forgotten which company makes a FreoPack, but if someone knows, they can say later. But they've started realizing that you may have diabetes, but you might also like to have something that's attractive, that you're pulling out of your bag every 5 seconds. So now I've picked up the 2 down the bottom. I've got a floral design pouch for my insulin pens, and I've also got the leaf pouch. I got them as an Easter present from my husband, so thank you to him for that. They're very good. And I also got one for a friend who's also joining from Brussels today, Pilar. I saw that she was in the attendees today. I mentioned to her that we were doing this talk, so hi to Pilar as well. Yeah, then I went to South Africa, and I won't talk about it too much because I know Diana's going to oh, I've gone ahead too quickly. Diana's also going to talk about South Africa, but I was petrified when I went to South Africa. I treated it like a military operation because I'd heard so much about people pickpocketing, and I knew that I was going on safari in Kruger National Park. I was going to be about 2-3 hours drive from a hospital. I was just paranoid something was going to go wrong because I have had health scares in the past. I've been in hospital in Germany, Belgium, UK, never in France. But in France, once at New Year, I had a hypocoma on New Year's Eve, and we called out an emergency doctor. So I came very close to going into hospital in France, and I was issued with glucagon, and then I was throwing up for about 24 hours on the next day when we travelled back to the UK, back to Devon. So, I mean, I've had a lot of hair-raising adventures in very civilized kind of Western European countries. So I was aware what could happen, and I was freaked out for South Africa. And I was so glad when I got back to Belgium, back to my husband. But here you can see some nice photos from my safari. I saw some elephants, saw some giraffes. There's Nelson Mandela, very, very famous across everywhere in South Africa. And down the bottom, you can see some of the penguins near Cape Town. They were beautiful. So I carried 3 versions of all my insulin and diabetic supplies that I needed. One for me, one for my brother, who was my travel companion, to carry, and one to go in the hotel safe. Because I thought if someone pickpocketed me, at least I'd be out and about with my brother. He could give me my insulin, dextrose, needles, sticks, all the stuff I needed. I wasn't using the flash glucose meter at that point. I was still on strips, testing strips and blood glucose meter. I've just been using the Freestyle Libre 2 now for just over a year, about 1.5 years now. And I'm loving it, but I'm also hating the constant results because I'm a perfectionist, and it bothers me that, I can't get it perfect all the time, but I guess no one can. Well, Sandra got 98% in range. I mean, she might mention that later on. I was amazed at that result, but not everyone can achieve those dizzy great things, but let's carry on. So I've put down a few points there. Avoiding pickpockets. Have a bag with a crossbody strap. Someone at the Bristol version of this presentation said that you could have a bag with like a mesh lining, so that if someone knifes your bag, they can't actually steal all your contents of the bag. My concern was that a blood glucose testing meter in a pouch would feel a little bit like a wallet if someone were pickpocketing me. And I thought, look, I really, really need to avoid it at all costs. I lose my blood glucose monitor, because if I'm in the middle of Kruger National Park, I can't get to a pharmacy. I can't replace it very easily, and it will ruin my trip. But Diana has had all sorts of scrapes and difficult encounters in all sorts of different exotic countries, as far as I'm concerned. So I think she'll also say a bit more about that topic afterwards. So I'm not so qualified to talk about that. As I say, spread your diabetic supplies across bags, give spares to your travel companion, your husband, your loved one, your child, or whoever it might be who's with you, so that if your bag gets stolen, probably you won't both lose your bags at exactly the same time. And I tried to hold on to my bag when I was like eating in restaurants, or I'll have it just across my shoulder even when I was eating in restaurants in South Africa, because I was paranoid. I mean, I'm a super control freak because of the diabetes, and big perfectionist, and I just tend to worry about what can go wrong in the plan B, C, D, E, and all the rest. I mean, I don't want it to ruin my holiday or my trip. Oh, and bring paper and electronic copy of your prescriptions, because then if you lose your supplies, you can still prove you're diabetic. You can still prove you need these things and that it's a necessary medical requirement for you. So yeah, it's always useful to have that bit of paper or an email with you with your repeat prescription, so that you can get hold of new things if you're stuck. Watch out though, because not all forms of insulin or strips are available and readily available in all countries. So if you're going for a long period of time, or you're going particularly far away to a particularly remote or isolated kind of location, maybe double check what's available in the country you're traveling to. Because if you did lose your insulin, I mean, you need a replacement. And if you have to then change your type of insulin whilst you're in somewhere like South Africa, that can be jolly tricky. So yeah, I don't mean to scare you, but I'm sure you've all thought it through anyway, and don't let it put you off going to the remote locations, because Diana's had amazing adventures and I'm looking forward to learning about how I can do the same if money and time allows. But I mean, I'm not working right now, so fewer trips to places like South Africa, but you know, maybe in the future. So I went to the Cape of Good Hope, the most southwestern point of the African continent. Oh, is someone else speaking there? Maybe you can put yourself on mute. I can hear someone else.
Okay, vámonos.
Not sure who it is. Okay, thank you. And that's the view from Table Mountain, bottom right. So it was an amazing trip, but this is the room in the Safari Lodge. My little brother, his appendix ruptured. He had to go to hospital. It was 3 hours drive to the hospital. He was 17 hours with a ruptured appendix. He was 28, 29 at the time. He doesn't have diabetes. He doesn't have any healthcare complications. He was basically perfectly fit and healthy. But when we were in the capital, Pretoria, he said, oh, I've got some chest pains. And I was like, well, you know, he said he'd been doing some he'd been over exercising. And he said his stomach pumps had meant that he maybe strained a muscle. So I thought, well, let's just go on the safari. So we got our safari pickup in the minibus, went for like 8 hours. As soon as we traveled to the safari park, on the route, 10 minutes down the road, he said, look, this pain is too much. I need to go back. I need to get medical attention. But he didn't say that clearly at the time. So he stayed in the safari lodge for 1 to 2 days, doing nothing, resting, whilst his appendix, he had the appendicitis. Then it obviously ruptured while he was, I'm not meaning to scare you all, but I'm just showing what can happen. So then I finished the rest of the South Africa trip as a blonde young woman all on my own, which is not so ideal from a security and safety perspective. I mean, Diana, I don't know, you'll tell us if you traveled with other people or if you traveled on your own there. I didn't feel comfortable and didn't feel confident as a blonde 20, 30-year-old something traveling on my own. So I counted down the days to get back to Belgium, and then I got back to my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, and I was very relieved. It was an awful trip. And I would just say, watch out, like if you're going somewhere remote, maybe check out what the options are in terms of hospitals or nearest airports if you needed to fly somewhere for medical attention. Because I mean, if you're somewhere like a safari in South Africa, you can't necessarily access the same sort of care and support that you can easily reach on the NHS or in the UK. You need to think it through. And obviously travel insurance, we'll get onto that afterwards. If you're going somewhere like that, I was told I was refused travel insurance for South Africa trip because I have type 1 diabetes. I also have another medical condition, which I mean, I won't go into detail on, but I was told that they did their estimations, they did all their questions, they did all their calculations, and then they said, our result is we can't offer you travel insurance. And I thought, well, what the heck do I do? But fortunately, I was insured by the European Commission to travel to any country of the world and have 100% cover for my diabetes care. So I was covered medically by that. So I took out travel insurance in the UK at the time, because I was traveling from the UK to South Africa with my brother. I took out travel insurance on the basis that I knew I would not have any medical cover whatsoever. I was paying 120 odd for the stupid travel insurance that didn't cover my medical situation at all. And then I just assumed that for the medical side of things, the commission cover would kick in. So I was double insured, but not everyone has that luxury. So if you have, I think they call it comorbidities, like if you have other, I hate the term, other conditions with diabetes, beware that travel insurers might possibly say that they can't cover you for something like South Africa. And don't be too surprised or disheartened. I mean, I was quite disheartened a bit about the prospect that, you know, another time I'm not covered by commission medical insurance anymore. I'm now on the Belgian system. And, you know, with pre-existing conditions like diabetes, it's a minefield in terms of insurance. So it's great that Stuart's here. I mean, he'll tell you more about that. But anyway, let's carry on quickly to the snow and the ice and the cold. I say when the snowman brings the snow, that's the biggest snowman I've ever seen in my life. That's me posing stupidly next to the giant snowman in the Santa Claus village in Rovaniemi, which is where if any kids put a letter in the post to Father Christmas and they put Father Christmas, the North Pole, it arrives in the post office in Rovaniemi in the Santa Claus village. So it was an amazing place. The lodge had like underfloor heating, had a private sauna, had like reindeer antlers as a kind of candelabra light. I mean, it was cool. I'd really recommend it if anyone wants a kind of Arctic adventure. It's just on the Arctic Circle. So there's a webcam. We chatted to my parents and said like, hey, we're in the Arctic Circle, you know. So, and we were in our great snow gear because it was -20, -30. It was super, super, super cold. And I was really freaking out again about the insulin before going, thinking, what the heck am I letting myself in for? I'm going to get really cold. I feel the cold anyway in the UK or Belgium, let alone going to the Arctic Circle. But it was one of the best trips I've ever had. I think the Morocco trip was my best trip ever because it was just out of this world. Like everything was so exotic and tropical and unusual for me. Here, there's a lot of snow, as you can see. It was very, very deep snow. I think it was about 1 meter of snow. Not really used to that in England. Definitely not in Belgium either. We get a bit more snow than England, but even so, like 1 centimeter in Devon and everything goes haywire. So this was interesting experience. This was the frozen sea. We had a walk on the sea, which was quite exciting. Yeah, I've certainly never seen the sea frozen because it's got the salt water, so you know it doesn't freeze so quickly or so easily. But yeah, lovely ice formations on the sea, and you can see the waves that are frozen. So it was exciting. Unfortunately, my luggage didn't travel with me because I missed my original flight to Finland. Because of snow in Brussels, so I couldn't get a taxi. The taxi wouldn't come to get me to the airport. I would have got a bus, but I knew the bus wouldn't get me to the airport in time. Then I got the train to the airport. The train got held up and delayed, and I missed my flight time to check in by about 10-20 minutes. But my flight was delayed by 2-3 hours, so I could have got my original flight, but Brussels Airlines would not let me on it. So I was stuck at the airport waiting for the next flight to get me to Copenhagen, where I had to change to get to Finland. So I flew through the night. I had to arrived at Copenhagen at like 3 in the morning. I had no sleep. For diabetes, that's a nightmare, obviously. It's not ideal circumstances before embarking on a big journey of 10 days. Here's my route. We traveled for 10 days right around Finland. I'm lucky enough to have a Finnish pen pal who booked the whole trip for me, and we traveled together and saw this Santa Claus village. We didn't see the Northern Lights, which I was really gutted about. I was really hoping to see this Aurora Borealis kind of colourful light thing. We thought we saw it one night, and my friend had just been in the sauna. Her hair was like frozen cold because she'd just come out the shower. She came out and her hair turned into icicles immediately because it was like -20, -30 outside. But it turned out it was a false alarm. It was just a laser light from a local nightclub and not the Aurora Borealis that I was calling her outside for. So anyway, that's just a little anecdote. I mean, it's less relevant to the diabetes. Here we went to a snow and ice castle where everything was frozen. Obviously, we had frozen ice glasses with our drinks served in the ice glass. We saw a little igloo there. Everything was made of snow or ice. You can see that's a little cafe where everything was cold. But of course, for the insulin, nightmare on legs. It was the right pain in the neck. Like to think how on earth I was going to look after my insulin and stop it freezing in a snow and ice castle. The secret option was basically a passport holder. I was wearing 5 to 6 layers of clothes. I mean, at -20, -30, you need to layer up. You can't just wear one thick fleece or one thick coat. You need layers that are thermal layers. Marks and Spencer's was pretty good for getting some thermal underwear. I didn't need really complex clothing. I think I went to Millets or Outdoor Adventure Shop or something like that. I had a very good ski jacket. I don't ski, I've never skied on snow, but my ski jacket is thermal and responds to my body temperature and the external outdoor temperature. So I had that amazing outer layer that was very thin, but very performing. And then I kept the passport holder with my insulin and testing meter next in about layer 1 or 2 of my many layers, so that my body temperature would keep it thawed and stop the insulin freezing. But my outer layers, you know, you obviously couldn't wear it out outside your outer layer because it would freeze immediately at -20, -30. So, I mean, it was a challenge, but I survived, and my insulin didn't freeze. And I had an amazing holiday, and it was really exciting going to the Arctic Circle. So these passport pouches come in all shapes and sizes. This is just a picture from Google of what you can get. I'd say if you go somewhere cold, it's a really good idea. If you're a pump user, you'd probably have to think a bit more. Maybe Sandra and Diana might have some extra things to say about traveling to cold places with a pump, because I've not done that yet. I mean, who knows, maybe I'll go to using a pump at some point, but for the moment, I'm kind of resisting it. I'm quite happy with my insulin pens, you know, as far as you can be happy with insulin pens. But anyway, I mean, that's enough from me. I'm sorry I've gone on for quite a long time, but there's lots of stories to share. Here, Sandra's now going to talk to you more about other continents. I've obviously traveled a lot in Europe, so I can answer any questions about like Western European countries later on, but less so about the rest of the world. Time travel, I've put the Doctor Who TARDIS here. Obviously, Sandra wasn't Doctor Who, but she has traveled a lot to other time zones, and I think Diana has too. So I've only traveled to other time zones. Like I went to New York once, I went to South Africa. South Africa's not a very different time zone anyway. Most of the time I've only traveled 1 to 2 hours time change, which doesn't really have any great impact on diabetic control. But certainly Sandra and Diana can elaborate on that more, and they'll talk about the pump. So I'll stop sharing and let you have a break from the PowerPoint for the time being. Thank you. Sandra, are you ready to go?
Hi everyone. Sorry, I've got beautiful sunshine streaming through my window, so a bit of a funny picture. Yeah, I've lived with type 1 diabetes for 61 years, and you can do a bit of maths here about my age. I was diagnosed at the age of 13, and I've got a birthday coming up next week, so give you a rough idea how old I am. I started to work abroad in the year 2000, and was piloting an insulin pump, which is how I got onto using a pump. My background is education, obviously going through head teacher. I was a schools inspector, and I hope there's no teachers here working. I was a lead inspector with Ofsted. Anybody throwing things at me here? But I always worked in areas of high social deprivation. And so that led to an invitation to work with different governments and local authorities in different countries. So I've worked in 15 states in the US, from east to west and north to south. I've even worked in Tulsa, and I can see now why Jean Pitney was 24 hours away from it. It was not the most pleasant place I've been to. I've worked in the States, I've worked in New York, but because of my background in social deprivation, it wasn't working in Manhattan, it was working in the Bronx and Harlem, which was a completely different experience. I worked in San Francisco, but not in the main part of San Francisco, but in Oakland, which is one of the most deprived areas in America, and Chicago. I love Chicago as a city. It's probably one of my favorite cities, but I worked in the South Side, which has got the highest murder rate in the US. So I've had quite a few interesting experiences out there. I've also worked in Abu Dhabi, Singapore, Uganda, Trinidad and Tobago, Cayman Islands and New Zealand. I haven't yet managed India and China. I'm hoping that Diana might have touched on those, because I'd like to hear more about that one. I've had a few hairy moments, which Laura's sort of described. Refusing to go through whole body scanners in the US because I wear an insulin pump. And US officials can be quite difficult. Oh, it's all right, you can go through. And they've all got guns, so you feel a little bit vulnerable, but I stick my ground there. Another time I was waiting outside a college in the Bronx, waiting to go in. It was early in the morning, about 6:30. And suddenly the door behind me opened, and I was grabbed by the scruff of my neck and hauled in. And the principal looked at me and said, "What are you doing there?" She said. "There were 3 murders there last week." So I quickly learnt. Travelling to New York, the week the liquids ban was introduced, was quite difficult. The security said I had to leave my insulin behind because it was a liquid, and I could buy some when I got off the flight at the other end. But you can imagine, I did argue quite politely, because you don't argue with security staff. And eventually an AA man, not Alcoholics Anonymous, American Airlines person, came along and rescued me, took me to a different security lane, and I got through okay. Another time, walking through the gardens in Uganda, I was living in a house with guards, locked gates and everything, and I went out into the garden and was rushed. Somebody called me back quickly because I'd just seen a black mamba, which is the most deadly snake, in the garden, and I was only wearing sandals. So some quite interesting lessons there. So we're here to talk about diabetes, and I suppose what I have to say, it is pump related, but it does refer to, it applies to people who are on type 2 on insulin as well, because the same issues apply, of course. So what have I learned? The first one is it's about time changes, which is always a bit of a problem. And the advice I would always give anybody is talk to your health team first, because they know you and they can give you advice. For me, with a pump, it would depend on how long the difference was. Somewhere like New Zealand, where you've got 11, 12 hours difference, was quite different to, say, San Francisco, where it's 8 hours. But for me, I would tend to put in a temporary basal, where you just either reduce or increase the amount of insulin you have going into your body constantly. And if you're on a pen, do the same with your long-acting. And then monitor just regularly and rigorously is the only way I've coped. I'm looking forward to how Diana copes, because we are all different. We all react in very different ways. On a flight, you need to check your blood glucose much more regularly, at least I had to. And also wear or carry medical ID. I belong to the medical alert. I worn a bracelet for years and years, and never take it off because of the risk of blood glucose dropping. But that's really important when you're traveling. The other thing would be keep a list of your medication with you, so you don't forget, for example, things like batteries for your pump or your blood glucose monitor. One thing people tend to say, take twice what you need. I took 3 times because I was working away from home for 12 weeks at a time. Copy of your prescription, Laura's already mentioned. If you're on a pump, you want your backup plan. I tend to use the disposable syringes and a vial of insulin as my backup plan, so I've always got something there. The other one would be card with I have diabetes in different languages, and you can get those from different organisations. Like Diabetes UK does them still. And as Laura said, we did produce a list of useful links, which I can send out if people would be interested later on. We've talked a lot about Frio packs. I love them. In Uganda, where there's constant power cuts, you couldn't trust the fridges. And also, if you were living with other people in them with a common kitchen, then you're always worried that the insulin may disappear, put in the wrong place, perhaps go in the freezing box. So I always kept mine in my Frio pack. And I once kept it for 7 days. Don't tell anybody that, because it's probably not the best thing in the world, but it seemed to keep it cool for that amount of time. The standard mantra, which everybody knows, is you don't put medical equipment in the hold because your bags can get lost. I have lost bags twice when I've been flying. Always keep it in your carry-on. And if you've got possible, to split it into 2, your handbag and then your carry-on luggage, so you've got a backup supply. as Laura's has already mentioned. Take some food in case the in-flight food isn't appropriate. So biscuits or something, so you can always have something to eat. One thing that I did learn is you don't ask for a diabetic meal because it's often not enough carbohydrate. So going for an ordinary meal and working out the carbs. Another point, and I think it's mentioned one of the questions, you need to check if you go into countries you're not familiar with, what medication is allowed in. I think we've all seen the film Bridget Jones, where she ends up taking stuff in that's not allowed. So it's always useful to get onto the UK travel advice section and see what medication isn't allowed, things like paracetamol, for example. Sorry, I've got one of these awful colds that's going around. I keep losing my voice. I was always traveling alone, so I always made sure that at least one crew member knew I had diabetes, just in case. I'm a very private person, and I don't actually, well, I never used to talk much about my diabetes. So I always found it a little bit difficult, but it is vital that somebody else knows you have diabetes, just in case. So we've talked a lot about hot and cold, so I won't say too much about that. For me, I've worked in sub-zero Chicago, worked in 45 degrees in Abu Dhabi, and sorry, gentlemen, I wear my pump inside my bra, so it keeps it warm in cold countries. And in hot countries, I use a Frio pack that's designed for a pump. So I've always got some sort of system to cope with that. I won't say too much about that because Laura's spoken, and I think Diana's going to as well later. Security, I've had real problems with, and that's because I think after 9/11, I was traveling quite a bit. And so the other thing is, in countries like Uganda or even the Cayman Islands, they don't really understand pump use. So I've always got documentation from the pump company which explains why I can't go through scanners. Now, there's a lot of discussion about that, about going through scanners. In the past, with my old pumps, I did used to go through, but I know that pump companies don't like it because there's a risk that it could affect the working of a pump, and you wouldn't be insured if that happened. So the advice strongly is don't go through with pumps, or even with continuous glucose monitoring. Not sure about the Libra. I don't use the Libra, whether it's the same. The other one is make sure your insulin's got the pharmacy label on, so that you can always check, if you get stopped by security, you can show them that. I like glucose in liquid form because it works on my hypos much more quickly. So I always buy that when I go through security. I did get caught once. I was traveling at an interchange at Oklahoma, and I had to go through security again. So I had to leave all the little packs of orange juice I'd bought behind. So that was a bit of a problem. So quite a lot there. Happy memories, though, that you do have with travel. In Uganda, avocados the size of small melons just dropping in the ground. So despite the black mambas, I used to go out and have avocados regularly. Being asked by the housekeeper in Uganda if I'd like to buy some bananas. And I said, oh, yes, please. And she brought a hand of bananas, which is 20. And there was me on my own in a very hot house. So I had to politely say, oh, I'll just have 2 and I'll pay you for the 20. The other one is standing at the start of the River Nile in Uganda and just looking out over where the River Nile begins and the history that was there. Writing reports in the Cayman Islands at dusk and watching the sun set over the Caribbean. In Trinidad, listening to the tree monkeys chattering in the house above me in the house. And then an interesting one, working in Abu Dhabi, I got in the lift with an Emirati and his 6 wives, who all stood silently behind him. And, as a Westerner, you look at this and think, Anyway, I met there were 6 young women, quite young women, and I met them in a shop, a jewellery shop, in the shopping mall, and they were chattering away like schoolgirls. And it was fantastic to see the relationship between them and the way they got on with one another. It was, quite a shock to a Westerner seeing that. Final point I'd like to make is just enjoy yourself. We all, I think, get obsessed about our diabetes and wanting to be in control 100% of the time. With diabetes, you can't. It's impossible. I came across a phrase some years ago, random weirdness, and I think that describes how you manage your diabetes. You have these, why on earth did that happen moments? I had one this morning. My blood glucose went up to 17, no reason whatsoever, unless I was scared about doing this talk, maybe, thinking about it. So we can't aim for perfection, just enjoy yourself. And if you do, your control does slip for a week or two whilst you're away, don't worry, it's not going to hurt you. I'm not sure what the medic would say when they hear me say that, but I'll end on that note. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, just another point I see in the chat, Diana was also saying that you can use Freopacks to keep your insulin thawed in cold temperatures. I didn't realize that, but thanks for sharing that. Maybe you'll say a bit more about that later when it's your part of the talk as well. But I didn't realize, I'm not sure if I had a Freopack when I went to the Arctic Circle. I probably already had some, but I didn't realize I could use them for that purpose. But I mean, the passport holder was a kind of ad hoc solution that seemed to work okay as well. So yeah, I like your solution, Sandra, of keeping the pump in your bra. That also sounds very sensible for something like the Arctic, if you were very cold outside. Yeah, just to finish off with my part of the presentation, I'll start screen sharing again, just to give you the top 10 tips for travel days, because I tend to travel internationally on average about once a month. So, I mean, I haven't gone very far in general, but I do travel a lot. So I've tried a few things. I've also recently tried putting my Libre 2 through a scanner, and it does make it more erratic, the results. It stops, that seems to be the key effect that has happened. I've put it through a scanner 2 or 3 times out of hundreds of times that I've traveled. Because like recently, when I just traveled back from England, I was bringing my GCSE art project, which is a 3D butterfly thing with wood on a piece of canvas, and I thought to get my sensor out, my one box that was worth I think 80 to 100 euros for that piece of equipment would have been too difficult whilst I was carrying my very complicated art project through security, which was already stressing me out, because if you go with something delicate through a security scanner, I was risking the thing breaking or getting destroyed. So I popped my scanner, which is currently on my arm, through the scanning device, actually the bag scanning device, which is even worse than the tunnel, the kind of archway that you are not really supposed to go through with Libre 2 or CGM either. I mean, Sandra's also told me off about that one, because previously I was not putting my bag through the bag scanner. I was taking my sensors out, carrying them through with my lovely letter from my diabetic doctor saying that I was entitled to carry sensors through and not put them in the bag scanner. It's good to have a letter like that, so that if you're somewhere far flung that people don't understand diabetes, I mean, even UK people don't always understand diabetes properly, you sometimes need to do a bit of explaining, and the letter just helps. I mean, it looks a bit more official, even though of course there's no guarantee that you haven't just drafted the letter yourself and written any odd thing down. But generally, if you're confident and you maybe have a wallet card as well, and possibly tag ID like a medical alert bracelet, medical alert pendant, with all that equipment, you can really prove and justify that you really are type 1 or type 2 diabetic, and that you have due cause to. Oh, there's another little message in the chat. I will ignore that for the time being. Yeah, that you've got good reason to be carrying the equipment that you're carrying, and that you don't get it confiscated in any way. We were talking in the chat about Freopacks or cool packs potentially being confiscated because of the liquid in them. I've fortunately never had that problem, but it opens my eyes a bit to what can happen. So good to know that you can bring some deactivated Frio packs through security and activate them in the toilets in the airport if need be. I mean, that's really good solution. I think another time, if I go to the Arctic or South Africa or Morocco again, I might bring some deactivated Frio packs. I have plenty of Frio packs because I like them, and I've collected them, and the crystals don't work as well after lots and lots of times of being used. So it's good to have some fresh ones as well. But I've never thrown away my old ones because I like them. They're not that cheap either. So, I mean, you know, I didn't want to throw away good equipment. So I've got all shapes and sizes of Frio packs and all colors, and well, mainly red and blue, but a variety. Anyway, over to the PowerPoint. Let me just share screen quickly. 1 second. Here we go. Hopefully that will work from current slide. Great. So there's top 10 tips for travel days. Most of them are obvious and self-explanatory, but it doesn't hurt to say again, you know, what you need to watch out for, because everyone has different experiences, as you'll have seen already this far in the talk. You know, two people might go to exactly the same destination, like, you know, Diana and I both went to South Africa, but I'm pretty sure, I'd like to hope, Diana, that your experience wasn't as negative as my one with my brother getting so unwell. I mean, I had to have the campfire barbecue on my own with an empty chair next to me where my brother was meant to be. It was difficult. It was traumatic, and I live to tell the tale, but I wouldn't necessarily repeat it again. It was an unfortunate experience. But anyway, here you see airport security, people looking as menacing and intimidating as they generally do when you walk up and think, I'm not a terrorist, I'm not a criminal, please let me through, let me get to my destination safely. And there's a little plane, because I'm going to be talking particularly about security checks here, whether that's taking an international train or an international flight. You know, it can also apply to a car journey, but generally you don't bother going through security if you're driving to your destination. You might if you're about to catch a ferry and the ferry company are a bit cautious, you never know. But everyone's probably dealt with security, and you all would have your own tips and tricks about how best to do so. So if there's things that we've forgotten, feel free to share afterwards, because we're also looking forward to learning from all of you, because it's really good to, you know, peer support, just to share experiences. I mean, I think it is really beneficial. So anyway, my number one tip would be, it's not in order of priority, it's just in random order. Make sure you can prove you're entitled to carry all your diabetic supplies. So you can do this in multiple ways. I generally have all three covered. I keep a wallet card from Diabetes UK in my wallet. Sadly, you know, Sandra says have it in all languages. I'm an interpreter translator. So when I was hospitalized in Germany, I just qualified in hospital public service interpretation from German to English and vice versa. So I was lucky enough that I could interpret for myself. Even though I had glandular fever in Germany, I was desperately ill. I couldn't even lift the water jug to pour myself a glass of water. I was so weak. And they called out 5 surgeons in the middle of the night. I had all tests across all the units in the hospital, all sorts of scans, because they couldn't work out what was wrong with me. In the end, I had 5 illnesses simultaneously, but the main one being glandular fever. So it was a difficult experience, but I interpreted for myself. 2 days after I had a near-death experience, my mother came across to Germany to join me, and I interpreted for her from the German TV. But it gave me something to do. It gave me another focus. But one of my friends from my interpreting course, I was asking her about blinddarm, dichtdarm, dunddarm, which is the difference between the small intestine, the large intestine, and different forms of intestinal illnesses. I'd forgotten the terminology, so I asked my friend. She said, Laura, do you want me to come across to Germany? I can come and interpret for you. So, I mean, I'm lucky I have all these contacts. But I said to her, I was like, Anna, that's really kind. Thank you so much, but I'll get by. I was okay. I mean, I've lived to tell the tale. Again, I'm still here. I was lucky. I didn't die in 2009 when I was hospitalized in Germany, but my diabetes was secondary in that hospitalization. I had ketoacidosis, as I count as one of my 5 illnesses, because obviously I was so desperately unwell that my blood sugars were high and not very good. And probably I had the hospital managing my diabetes, which you probably all know is never as satisfactory as if you're in control yourself, because you know your body, you know how it responds to different doses of insulin, you know what to do far better than most medics, even though they're meant to know better than us. Voila. So anyway, medical alert jewelry. I mean, I think Sandra's got a link for that. I'm sure you've probably all come across it. I'm not as good as Sandra. I don't like a tag saying I'm diabetic. so I don't wear my bracelet, but on travel days, I religiously do, as long as I remember. Sometimes I forget, because I think if I'm on my own in an airport and I fainted, I'd be in much dire straits compared to if it happened in the supermarket locally at home. Sandra and I had a chat about this before. I said I could ask a stranger for some sugar. Sandra said that I have too much trust in third parties and other people. But I mean, leave it up to you. You decide if you want a diabetic tag for security purposes, or if you don't want the stigmatization of always thinking you're diabetic. I mean, obviously you can't get away from it, but you know, the tag obviously confirms it. It was useful in Germany when I was hospitalized. I held up my diabetic medical alert bracelet. I was too weak to say I had diabetes. I was too weak to explain what my conditions were, but I held up the arm and it said I'm type 1 diabetic and ring this number to get the support. And you know, you have to pay a yearly subscription to keep your medical doses up to date with Medical Alert. It's probably worth doing. I don't do it because I think, and it's enough information for medical airport security people to look and think that I am actually entitled to carry my insulin, that I am diabetic, and if I were hospitalized, it's enough to say, here, I'm diabetic, and then afterwards they ask me about my doses and what's going on. But if you want the extra layer of security, I think Sandra might know better than me. It's maybe in the regions of 40 to 60 pounds a year, maybe, to keep your medical records up to date with Medical Alert.
I don't pay anything, Laura. It's part of
it's free now. It was charging before, so that's why I've never done it.
Sorry, no, you do.
Good to know. Thank you, Sandra.
You do pay £30 annual fee. Sorry, I forgot.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, it's a trivial amount, but it depends. When I was a student, £30 is quite a lot to be paying each year. So it's up to you. And the wallet card you can get via Diabetes UK. This is just an example I plucked from Google. So, I mean, my one from Diabetes UK looks a bit different to that. I think this was an American version. But even if you source it from the States, I mean, the key thing is that it says you're type 1 diabetic, or you can make one yourself. I've also made one like a wallet card explaining what to do if I have a diabetic coma, what doses I take, and I laminated that before going to South Africa and carry it in my handbag everywhere in Belgium and in any country, because that way, if I'm hospitalized or if I'm unable to explain myself what I need, someone searches your bag. That's what happened to me in Germany when I was too unwell and weak to be able to explain who I was, how I was insured, what I needed, that I was type 1 diabetic. I saw them rummaging through my wallet and I was like thinking, that's a bit weird, but of course it makes sense. So if you laminate something explaining yourself what you need and what your condition is and what your doses are, that could make life a lot easier if you're hospitalized unexpectedly for something where you're not in a position to explain about what your needs are to other people, which was my case, sadly, in Germany. Anyway, moving swiftly on, keep all your insulin in your hand luggage. It will freeze in the hold. I'm sure you've all been told that mantra. Don't ever stick your insulin in your case that's checked in. That's not a good idea. Also, one thing to bear in mind, airlines, when they say you're only allowed one item of hand luggage, my Finnish friend confirmed to me that you're allowed one item of hand luggage plus one personal item. A personal item can be a handbag. It can be a laptop bag. It can be, I don't know, probably not a backpack or a small case. That would count as your one item of hand luggage. But a lot of airlines in Europe anyway, it's probably different when you go beyond Europe. And I'm sure Sandra and Diana will tell you more. But certainly in Europe, even if it says one item of hand luggage, don't be alarmed. So I always then carry some insulin supplies in my handbag, some insulin supplies in my backpack. So I have two items of hand luggage, even though it's only officially allowed one item of hand luggage in the writing about the airline. That way, if one bag gets lost or stolen, you've got the other one for backup. When I fly, I always take a backpack and a handbag, and I leave enough space in the backpack that if the airline is being bolshy and awkward and saying I am only allowed one item, I can squash my handbag into my backpack, and hey presto, I just have one item of hand luggage. So, I mean, that's the best way around it, because getting your daily insulin supply that you need while you're at the airport, you know, it might be lunchtime, you might have to inject. It's good to have that in a handbag if you're a woman. I don't know, maybe a man bag if you're a man, I mean, or a handbag if you want to carry a handbag anyway, up to you. But yeah, I mean, it's good to have it accessible. In a backpack, it's not that accessible. So that's why I like my 2-bag policy when I fly. But anyway, up to you. Do what works best for you. Spread your diabetic supplies across different bags. I know Sandra's already told you that too. No insulin in the hold, but you can have spare needles, testing strips, spare batteries shouldn't be in the case either. Batteries, I think, need to be in the hand luggage, don't they, Sandra? Is that right? You're on mute.
Yes, I couldn't find the button. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Sandra's opened my eyes a bit to the fact that I need spare batteries. I forgot spare batteries when I spent New Year in Budapest a few years back, and my blood sugar testing meter died. So I lived without any blood glucose results for 2 days, which doesn't sound horrific to a normal person, but to anyone that has, I mean, we're normal as well, but anyone who has diabetes will know that living without any blood results for 2 days is highly difficult for planning doses when you have a carbohydrate controlled diet. Very, very difficult. So take the batteries, follow Sandra's advice, don't follow my bad example there. But yeah, so if you spread your supplies across 3 bags, if your household luggage doesn't come through, which can happen if you miss a tight connection or something like that. In Finland, I was without my hold luggage for 24 hours until it was couriered to my location in Helsinki or Turku or wherever I was at the time. I've forgotten now. I traveled all over Finland. But yeah, I mean, you never know which bag you're going to lose. So plan to lose at least one of them just in case, and don't let that ruin your trip. Carry all spare sensors through security with you manually. That's what your guides for CGM and flash meters will definitely say. That's what the medics say. That's what the insurance says. So it's probably a good idea to follow it. Sandra says also watch out for the arch that you walk through. We're not meant to walk through that. You can also, with CGM or flash monitors, you can also get a lanyard, which I think I've spoken to someone in the UK, you can order online. Sandra and I were saying we'd have to get it at an airport, one of these lanyards to say you have an invisible disability with sunflowers on. Sandra, have you now got one of those? I haven't got one yet.
No, I keep meaning to. I've got the link though in the...
Oh, great.
I can put the link on here if you like.
Is that for ordering it online?
It's the link to the site, yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. Because I met someone at a train station in Devon and she had one, and I don't know, I think she had a physical mobility issue. But I asked her about getting it and she said, oh, you can just order it online. So there's no excuse not to get one if you're traveling lots and you think it would be useful and you don't care about stigmatizing the fact that you're a type 1 diabetic. But, you know, obviously we have it, we can't hide from it. So it makes sense to have the medical backup and proof that you need to be helped through security. And in the Bristol version of our talks, we also discussed which lanes in Bristol Airport are better for getting through without issues if you have an invisible disability. Apparently there was a slight difference. One lane was more geared up to cope with it. But if you're traveling somewhere like South Africa or Morocco, you're not necessarily going to know which security guard is likely to be more favorable or helpful. So you have to be prepared for all eventualities. And here we go, always carry spares. You never know where you'll get held up. One year I was getting the Eurostar back for Christmas to join my family, and it got held up for 17 hours in the tunnel the day before I travelled. I went to the UK for my graduation. I was due to come back to Brussels for 3 days work before Christmas because I was a trainee and I didn't have much holiday leave. And then I was due to come all the way back to Devon for Christmas. I got stuck in England. So I got a longer holiday break because it was force majeure. It was like outside my control. I then tried to book a flight, but the flights were grounded because of all the snow. And then I couldn't really drive very well. I'm not a great driver. I'm quite a nervous driver. So I didn't want to get a ferry. And fortunately, the European Commission accepted that and said that I could have 3 extra days holiday leave as force majeure. And so if you get stuck in like a Eurostar for 17 hours, you need the equipment to deal with that diabetically. So you need that, the extra spares of the equipment. You know, COVID, travel rules for coming in and out of different countries have been changing like willy-nilly, like nobody's business these last couple of years. So you might get held up for even 2 months at your chosen destination. Hopefully that won't happen, touch wood, but you never know. So while I was traveling during COVID, when I went to like see my dying father-in-law in Germany, we traveled on the humanitarian grounds when no travel was allowed. my husband and I, because it was his father that was on his last sort of deathbed. It was very difficult, and we had all the letters to prove it, but you need extra equipment in case you get stuck when you travel under COVID circumstances. So if it gets bad again this Christmas and you're traveling at Christmas, New Year, bring like double, triple, quadruple, whatever you need, even maybe enough insulin for 2-3 months if your destination doesn't produce your type of insulin, because it, you know, I'm on another rapid Levemir. It's not available even now in all countries, which is quite an eye-opener really. But yeah, I mean, it's the reality of the situation. And you if you're on analog insulin, you don't necessarily want to then change to human or pig insulin or other forms of insulin when you're in a destination that you don't know very well. So carry spares. Oh, always bring a spare finger pricking device if you use CGM or flash glucose monitors, and spare batteries. We've talked about the batteries, but bring a spare monitor, because if you forget that your sensor or your pump or whatever is in the scanning device and then it malfunctions, or someone steals your bag and you lose all your supplies, I think Diana's going to talk about that, you need backups. So, I mean, I always have an old-fashioned blood glucose monitor with me and enough testing strips that could last me for my trip. I don't bring enough testing strips to last for the 2-3 months, because I would hope that at some point I would get my Libra 2 back, because you know, you get a bit attached to it after a while, scanning all the time. Well, with my one, it doesn't communicate with my phone automatically, so I still have to do the scanning bit. But anyway, I mean, you'll all have your own experiences of that. And bring more food and snacks than you possibly think you will need on your journey. It has happened so many times to me that maybe I thought I'd have 1 hour connection at Paddington or St Pancras when I'm coming through London, and then there's a problem in London, or there's a problem with the Eurostar, you're delayed, you don't have time to buy a sandwich, you can't eat dinner, you can't go to the restaurant, you can't eat at Paddington Station in the cafe, you know, you have to run, you have 5 minutes to change between one train and the other. I mean, I know they're extreme scenarios, but it does happen. I mean, you've seen the rail strikes in England recently. You never quite know what's happening when you step foot outside your front door, even if you're just traveling 1 hour by car to the next nearby town somewhere. So bring extra food, as you always have to do if you have diabetes. I mean, you probably don't need to be told that. Bring a copy of your repeat prescription and doctor's contact details. Doctor's contact details are good, because if you're hospitalized, you're too weak to discuss all your doses, your diabetic specialist should know what your doses are roughly, and you can just give their number and they can call and speak to among themselves. Most countries will know some English. We're really, really, really lucky in that respect, that when I've been hospitalized in other countries, the medics are highly skilled, qualified academics. Often they have some knowledge of English. It might not be perfect. They might not be able to talk to you about the difference between the Dundam and the Dickdarm, you know, the small intestine, the large intestine, but they probably will be able to explain and understand what you need for your diabetes care. So you can just join the dots, put them in contact with your doctor, or get your husband or wife or child or someone else to give those details to the medics, and you'll save yourself a lot of aggro. Oh, and if you're traveling for ages, if you go for a long trip away or to a remote destination, like my trip to on safari in Kruger, you might want to just check the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office country-specific healthcare advice as to what sort of things are available in the country you're going to, what the context is going to be like. And Diabetes UK has amazing travel tips, way better than the ones about hot and cold climates that I've given you, talking all about insulin sensitivity, how it changes when it gets hot, when it gets cold. I mean, it's quite an individual topic. I mean, for me, I find my insulin sensitivity doesn't always follow the rules, but you know, each to his own. So check out the Diabetes UK advice, because it's really, really good. And most importantly, just have fun, enjoy your trip. Don't let the diabetes get in the way. I mean, plan for unexpected circumstances so that you're not going to ruin your holiday or your business trip. And yeah, that's about it from me. Sorry, that was a lot of information. And Stuart, I think, is now going to speak to you about travel insurance. Thanks, Stuart. I'll stop screen sharing so you can say what you've got to say. If you're there, yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Everybody hear me okay? Just put a thumbs up. Yeah, cool. Okay, I just see if I share my screen a minute, because I've got a PowerPoint. I don't know if it works or not. So let me just have a look. There we go. He says. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? It should come at travel insurance. Why do we need it? Yeah. Okay, so a little bit about me first of all. My name's Stuart. I help out with Sandra at the Bristol Diabetes Network Group. I've had type 1 diabetes for 47 years, since the age of 2. I live near Bath. We've got bright blue skies here today near the city of Bath. I have traveled a bit around the world. I've been to New York, I've been to Western Europe, but not over to Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere like that. I have worked in the insurance industry for about 12 years. So I've worked for various insurance companies: Direct Line, Allianz, Mapfre, Royal Bank of Scotland. I now work for the NFU Mutual in property and commercial, but I have done three years in travel insurance with medical assistance, and that's key for traveling for any person across the world that's leaving from the UK. Just going about travel insurance first of all. So the first thing is, why do we need it? That's the main thing. So I've got a few slides to go through with you this morning. So the first thing about insurance is a transfer of risk. It's used if you need to use your insurance policy. It's used if you incur a financial loss, and then a claim is made financially to try and put you back into the same position that you were in before. Okay. You do need to take out travel insurance before you depart from your trip. Okay, not during, you would not be covered, but beforehand. So if you're booking a holiday with a travel agent, you may want to review your travel insurance to see what you've got, what cover is available to whichever destination you're going to, or several destinations as well, if you're traveling quite a few times during the year as well. Okay, the transfer risk is the same for not just for travel insurance, that's also for motor, home, life insurance as well. There is some risks can be very great, some risks are very minimal as well. Okay, some of the first things to check about when you're traveling. So select which country you're going to go to. Okay, is it safe to travel to there? I think Laura and Sandra have covered a few bits on that this morning. You can check the FCO government website and gov.uk. You can type which country you want to go to, have a look at if it's safe to go to and travel to. Obviously, things have changed with the COVID and Brexit and that sort of thing as well, so I have to be careful of that. Also to know, how long is my trip? So is it going to be a 7-day trip, a 5-day trip, a month trip, 3 months? Am I going to be traveling across the world? So you need to sort of maybe think about that. Do I need to buy travel insurance for myself or the rest of my family, friends? You can get a travel insurance policy for yourself. You and your partner, for example, if you have family, do you have children? Yeah, you can get a policy for them or separately. Check with it which insurance company you want to buy your travel insurance from. It's always best to shop around. Okay. Other thing to consider as well, which I think one of the questions was about the cost and the risk. Okay, with diabetes, do I have a medical condition that can affect me when traveling or require medication during the trip? Now, and that's just not with diabetes, that's with anything else that you suffer from as well. Okay, so you do need to specify those on your travel insurance policy. So diabetes type 1 or type 2, need to specify that. There might be some other questions to ask. Do you have high cholesterol? Do you have high blood pressure? Those sort of things, those questions will be asked for. That's to build the risk, to know, is the risk too great for that person to travel to this country? Does the insurance company want to cover that person, for them? Again, that's why these questions are asked, okay? Will I be going on multiple trips during the year? So yeah, do I need to get a multiple trip policy? So if I'm traveling loads of places around the world this year, am I just going to just on one holiday? So you might want to look at a single trip policy. There are various policies around to have a look at them, okay? And depending what type of holiday you want to go on as well, okay? Other thing to consider as well, this is also an interesting one. Have I got other insurance besides travel insurance? So for example, you might have travel insurance cover with your bank or credit card provider, okay? You may have private medical insurance as well. So things like Bupa, that sort of thing. You might have that through work, or you might have that as a separate policy. Okay. Does it cover you for being abroad as well? The other thing to do is also update your travel insurance about any up to date, keep them up to date with any health conditions. Because if you're buying your say you book your holiday in January, but you're not traveling until August, for example, a lot of people with summer holidays may, January is a good month to take out your holiday where you want to go to in the summer. You could take your insurance policy out then, but if you've been ill during the year, you might need to notify the insurance company to say, I've now been diagnosed with this. Can I still use my travel insurance for that if something happens to me? Okay. So it's worth just checking with the insurance companies on that. Also, when you're traveling, what's the purpose of my trip? Am I just going for business, pleasure, or am I just going to be traveling around to do other things? So, have that and bear in mind what you're going to be doing. So maybe just sort of planning ahead, maybe a good idea to what you're going to be doing. I'm just going to go back. I've missed a slide there somewhere. Hang on, bear with me a moment. Number 4. Okay. I'm going on a skiing holiday, cruise, or taking part in hazardous activities. Do I need additional cover? Now, there are options for skiing holidays. Normally from sort of now to March, people will be considering to go on a ski holiday. So you need to have ski cover in place. Okay. If you're going on a cruise, you might need a policy for that. You might find that your travel insurance may cover for both of them, depending where you're going. Okay, so if you're going on a cruise around the Mediterranean or across the States, you might need to check, or the Caribbean, you might need to take out extra insurance. Am I going to be doing any hazardous activities? So if there's anything, maybe some like scuba diving or parachuting or anything like that, just check what your travel insurance covers you for. Okay, what activities does it cover you for? Do I need to take out extra cover if I'm going to be doing any of these hazardous activities as well? Okay. The other one is, another question comes up is my EHIT card still valid? So that's the European Health Insurance Card. Now, because obviously we've come out of Brexit and everything, if you took an EHIT card out before the end of 2020, it's normally sort of got cover for 5 years. That is still valid at the moment. It has now been replaced with something called the GHIT card. It's called the Global Health Insurance Card. Okay. We'll go through that a little bit later on another slide. Okay. Is everybody happy with that at the moment? Any questions or anything?
Just about the slide. Can you change it to slideshow so it's just that little bit bigger?
Sorry, I didn't get that last bit.
The slideshow, just to change it. So we're just on full screen at the moment. So.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. I don't use PowerPoints very often. I do apologize.
No worries.
My internet, my internet's coming up unstable at the moment, so I do apologize. Okay. I'll just move on to the next slide. I think it's probably easier to do that. I'll click them down.
Actually, Stuart, sorry, if you just go to the top where it says slideshow, you should be able to click on view show from current slide. If you see where it says slideshow.
Okay, hang on, bear with me. Oh, slideshow, sorry, at the top.
Yeah, at the top there. And then you should have view from current slide as an option. From current slide would be good. And then you just click through. Yeah, that's much better.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'll just go on a little bit about what the travel insurance covers you for. So travel insurance can cover you for risks of injury, death, cancellation, charges, curtailment. That's cutting short your trip for a specified reason. There are some sort of charges, medical fees, loss of possessions, third-party liabilities while traveling. Okay. Policies are usually issued for the duration of the holiday or business trips overseas, although annual policies can be issued for regular travelers as well. So I've just taken some details from most insurance policies because I've got one with All Clear at the moment. That's my policy I'm using at the moment for travel. And I used to work with them. They're underwritten by Zurich at the moment. So it used to be with Mapfre, but because Mapfre decided to close their UK business, they sold a lot of their policies, and so other businesses have bought them. So it's all about the underwriting of the policy. So most policies will have a standard policy. So these are some of the things that you might see that crop up. So personal accident. I'm hoping it doesn't come to that when you're on your holiday, but it does happen, unfortunately, with this. Number 2 is the key one. Okay, so this covers medical treatment, additional hotel, travel expenses, additional additional cost of bringing a patient home. Okay, additional expenses for those that, if the insured party who are delayed due to illness or injury. So cost may be low for UK holidays where the NHS treatment usually applies. So with medical expenses, you need something on the holiday. So if you have an illness, say it was a hypo, if it was an ear infection, if it was gastros or food poisoning, those sort of thing, you might need to contact the insurance company if you get, and also if you're going to be admitted into hospital for something else. So what you normally need to do is to make sure that you've got an insurance policy that's got 24-hour cover for medical assistance. Okay, so if you're calling in the early hours of the morning, you need some help. If your policy, your medical assistance team is only open 9 to 5, that's no good to you, really. So you need one that's open 24/7. Okay, and there are quite a few that are, but it's worth shopping around and finding out, checking a policy. If you make a call, about your policy, does the medical assistance department open 24/7? Can I get hold of anybody to speak to? Okay. What you would normally do if you have to make a call to them, they will take all your details down. So it's all your personal details, so your name, maybe email address, age. If you're calling on behalf of somebody else, just give them all the details that you've got provided at the time. Also the location of where you are, which country are you in? If you know the dates that you're gone, what your travel date was at the time from when you travel on your holiday until when you're coming back. So if it was on the second week of your trip, but I'm traveling, I'm coming back at the end of the week, given the time of when you're sort of coming and leaving. They will ask those standard questions. The standard questions that you have to answer when they get the information. They will make a decision, obviously, what needs to happen. Are you having treatment at the moment? Yes, I'm sitting in the hospital waiting room. Okay, is it a public or a private hospital? Okay, they might, if it's a private hospital, you might have to pay up front to be seen. Okay, if you've had to call an ambulance or anything and you had to pay, keep hold of any receipt or invoice for that. Okay, when you make a case there, you might say, right, okay, we need to get a form out to you as a consent form. If we need medical details, that's obviously the what will happen in some countries. They have a provider that they use, so they will get in contact with the hospital. They will send the medical reports back to the insurance company. They want to know what your condition is, what treatment you're having. Is it something that's covered on the policy? If it's a yes, that's fine. Are they happy for you to stay in a private hospital? Yes, that's okay. If it's safe to do so, sometimes they might say you have to go to public. We don't want to necessarily do that, but sometimes the cost can add up, especially in the United States. Their cost for medical treatment is really, really expensive. Okay, so just to be aware. They might say move to another hospital. It might be that's a hospital that's not suitable for treatment. And also financial costs, because sometimes they inflate the costs for treatment as well. They put things on there sometimes that if you've got if you're requiring antibiotics, they might charge you for bandages. We've had that before now. They put extra costs on there. So we're always aware, of certain hospitals. If you are traveling to a country, maybe Spain or wherever or France or Germany or wherever, see if there are, what medical facilities are there. If you do need them, you do need the hospital. That hospital is a really good one. I might be able to go there. But at the time, put your medical case in, make sure it's covered. You've got the cover in place, and make sure you've declared your medical conditions on the policy. Okay. If you haven't, what might cause delay on that? Not so much with a broken bone, but so much with your heart condition, liver condition, kidney conditions. You need to, they might ask for your details of your GP, and they will ask for your notes for, say, the last 5 years, okay, to see what treatment you've been having, and you haven't actually declared it. If you haven't declared something that you're having treatment for away from the UK, you may not be covered, and the case will be declined, and you will have to pay for your treatments, okay, and that can be expensive, okay, just to be aware of that, okay. There are some other things on the policy you can go through. So loss of deposit.
Hey,
so
Stuart, this is really great. that we're a bit running behind time, and I'm wondering whether it would be okay with you if we share your slides later.
Yeah, I can email them across. Yeah, that's no problem. If you send me an email address, I'll send them across to you.
Oh, that'd be lovely. Thank you. It's been really great.
Is that all right? Yeah, I can email it across. Just let me know where to send it. I'll send it. I can send it afterwards. Or drop me an email. I'll send it across.
Lovely. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
So there's some other things.
Stuart. Just to say, if you could share it with all participants, that would be really good. I'd love to have a copy of it as well. It's really, really useful.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, if you've got your email addresses, is it Diana? If you've got something, I can forward it, and if anybody wants to forward it out, that's absolutely fine. I'll put it what I've got, all the slides there. Okay. So just some other things that you can claim for as well. So baggage. So you covered about baggage earlier. Delayed baggage is another one. Travel interruption, travel delays, legal expenses. So there's some other things you can be covered for. Just some things about European health insurance card. So it's valid until expiry date. Once it expires, you need to apply for a global health insurance card. Details are on the government.uk website or the NHS website as well. Okay. And also to make sure before you can make sure you've got all your travel documents are up to date as well, including your passport as well. Okay, so make sure they're all up to date. And at the end of the day, is to have a great vacation as well. All right. But I will email the slides across. If someone sends me an email, I'll send it across to you. I can do that this morning. It's not a problem for you.
Thank you, Stuart. Very interesting. Right. Yes. Thank you very much. Right, Diana, over to you.
Unmute myself. Thank you. Unfortunately, this is going to be a bit of a rush job because I've got an hour's worth of slides to give in about 20 minutes now, but I'll do what I can. Let me just see if
we can always if you send copies, we can always send them out, Diana.
Yeah.
Oh, would you be able to run over a little bit?
I can run over a little bit if people are happy to stay.
I am. I'm absolutely glued to this. It's brilliant. Thank you. Oh.
Okay. Hopefully, well, I can go quick over some of it, but yeah, it just seems to run over a bit. Okay. I'll get started. Can you see my screen? All right.
No, there's no pictures.
Oh, there's not.
No.
Oh, Stuart's still sharing.
Here it is. Here it is.
Hang on. Let me just go into slideshow mode again. That's probably just taking a while. Right, can you see it now? I can't see if that's a
yes. Thank you.
Yes, couldn't see if that was yes. Okay, so I'm going to talk about kind of adventure side of travel as much as anything. Yes, without further ado. So this is partly from a talk I gave a while back on adventure travel. So I haven't always been a kind of outdoors person. This is me, ballroom dancing. I used to compete for 10 years. I competed at ballroom dancing. So this is me looking very glamorous at various national championships about 10 years ago. Actually, that's not really true. I have always been an outdoors person. That was a slight split personality there. I actually grew up playing football and cricket. This is me playing cricket, aged oh gosh, I don't know, about 10, I think. And riding horses. This is me, very, very small, riding my mum's horse, aged about 2, I think. I did grow up to ride some slightly larger ponies. I had a very strange childhood. I actually went to an all-boys school till I was 6, long story. And then, so I was the only girl in an all-boys school till I was 6. So I grew up very much surrounded by boys doing things like playing football and cricket and running around doing very active things. Then I went to an all-girls school when I was 11. And at the age of 8, I got type 1 diabetes. So I was always very different, as say, growing up in an all-boys school, having diabetes at a time when It was a kind of thing that people didn't really talk about. There was no internet, there was no social media, there was nothing. So I always felt like I was very, very different from an early age. And I was always very kind of reluctant to talk about or share the fact that I had diabetes, partly because my dad also had type 1 diabetes and he very much kept it very, very quiet. So I kind of grew up for a long time till I went to university, really, and even beyond that. Not really kind of trying to hide diabetes and just pretend it didn't exist as much as I could. And this had some impact on the way that I do things. Then when I left school, before I went to university, I spent 9 months in New Zealand on my own. So life was very easy back then in the, so that would have been in the late 80s. Diabetes wise, so I went off to New Zealand with a rucksack, or a 65-litre rucksack, which had everything I needed for 9 months essentially. I didn't really know what I was going to do in New Zealand apart from travel around, do some work, whatever. I had no contacts in New Zealand. I had nothing. And I was actually going to go to Israel for my 9 months, and then the Gulf War started, so I decided to go to New Zealand instead. So I literally took a backpack. I took, say, there wasn't much diabetes kit around then. I literally took a pack of emergency syringes, a few packs of insulin cartridges for my 2 Novo pens, one for long acting and one for short acting, a blood glucose meter, and a few packs of testing strips. I also didn't test that much at the time, and a few packs of glucose tablets. And that was it. That was all I took, diabetes kit, for 9 months in New Zealand. I traveled pretty light. Frio bags didn't exist then, but I wasn't in any extreme temperatures anyway. And actually, a lot of the time I was staying in youth hostels and things, and I had access to fridges. But my insulin lasted fine for 9 months, mostly not even in a fridge. As I say, not in extreme temperatures. We'll come on to that later. But also, I was in New Zealand. It was a civilized country, and I knew that I was never going to be that far from civilization, and I could get anything I needed if anything went wrong. So in the last 15 years or so, I've done a lot of active adventure travel. I've been on lots of exciting holidays. There's a few examples in Iceland in 2014, trekking on glaciers. That's just in Snowdonia, climbing, winter climbing. This summer, I went to Mongolia, spent 2 weeks trekking with nomadic herders in the middle of nowhere in outer Mongolia. That was pretty wild and exciting. One of the very stupid things I did in Mongolia was I took a Frio pack with me, and for some unknown reason, I completely just forgot to put my insulin in it. It was quite hot in Mongolia, and it hadn't really occurred to me there was an issue until my friend who was with me was telling me about how her chocolate was melting. And I thought, if your chocolate's melting, I'm not sure my insulin's doing very well. And actually, I discovered that my insulin had started to go off a bit, and by the end of the trip, it was losing its power. The only thing I could do in the middle of Mongolia, in the middle of nowhere, was to just increase the amount of insulin I took. So I was basically doubling the insulin dose. And it was a very stupid thing for no reason, because I actually had a Frio pack with me, and for some reason I just hadn't put my insulin in it. Stupid moment. And there's plenty of those. Some more trips. Namibia 2014. Actually, that was the first time I destroyed my insulin. I managed to both boil it and freeze it on the same trip. It was very, very hot. And for some reason, not all of my insulin was in a Frio pack again. I'd left some in my kit bag, and we were traveling, we were cycling, we're on a mountain biking holiday. So we're mountain biking every day, but we had vehicle support. And some of my insulin was in my kit bag. And what I didn't realize, because it's quite cool in the bus, was that they dumped all the kit bags out on the campsite and left them there for about 5 hours in 40-degree heat while they're waiting for us to arrive on the bikes. So by the time I'd got there, my insulin had kind of boiled. We then stayed in a hotel, and I put my insulin in the fridge in the hotel, didn't realize that the temperature of the fridge was set way too low, and my insulin actually then froze. So I managed to both boil it and freeze it on the same trip. Again, all I could do was just increase the amount of insulin, and it still worked. It just needed more insulin to cover the same thing. So again, lesson learned there. There's top right is me in the Arctic Circle doing a trip. So this was quite a wild trip I did a few years ago, where we trekked 110k in the Arctic Circle in the very north of Sweden. We had to take everything we needed for the trek. We did it in about 4 days. There was no way out except by helicopter rescue. That was the only escape if something went wrong. There was literally nothing there. We had to take a lot of first aid kits and everything just in case. We were totally self-sufficient, tents, food, camping stuff, everything. I had a lot of jelly babies in my rucksack. But yeah, there was nothing if anything went wrong. So, you know, I did take plenty of spares, but we'll come on to that. South Africa, in cycling around the Cape of South Africa, again in about 35 degrees. It was just after I got a Libra, my first Libra sensor, and I'd had it about a week. And on the first day, it fell off because I got very sweaty. So I was a bit annoyed because having just got a sensor and been really excited about being able to use it on a cycling trip, I then had to revert back to blood glucose testing for the rest of the trip. And that's me at the bottom, is me in the French Alps a couple of years ago doing Via Ferrata, again, poncing around on mountains, which is one of the things I like to do. Again, mountain biking, playing softball. Oh yes, and one thing I should say is that I'm registered blind. So as a result of diabetes, about 25 years ago, I lost a good chunk of my sight. I was just very, very unlucky. They were monitoring it. It went and it just deteriorated very, very fast. I had loads and loads of laser treatment. They told me after a few months, they said, you're going to lose all your sight in 6 months. And thankfully, so I was kind of prepared for that. And thankfully, I didn't. And they managed to save it, largely due to me getting an insulin pump. So this was in the mid-90s, before pumps were really even much around in the UK. I was the first person in Manchester to have one. And there's a long story attached to how I got my insulin pump, but I basically took it to my doctor and said, I'm going to try this. Will you support me? And he said, yes. And that pretty much saved my sight. So my travels, not only do I have to deal with diabetes, but also being visually impaired, which has its own challenges. So this is kind of how I see the world. Very blurry is the answer. And at night, I see almost nothing. So just sort of dazzling lights. So this provides a lot of interesting challenges as well, traveling. And yes, I probably shouldn't be mountain biking and so on, but that's another story. In 2013, I climbed Kilimanjaro, which again had all sorts of interesting challenges for kit. It was very hot at the start. It was very cold. About minus 20, I think, by the time we got to the summit night. Why did I climb Kilimanjaro? There's actually some, two reasons for this. Firstly, my dad, who was type 1 diabetic for nearly 60 years, that's him after having an external pacemaker in Cyprus when he fell ill in northern Cyprus, which is not a good place to be ill, let alone with type 1 diabetes. But he traveled a lot, he did all kinds of things, and he never let it stand in his way. So he was kind of my inspiration. And actually, I did the trip just after he died, after he lost both his legs and eventually died from complications. He told me just before I went, he said, I'm not going to die until you get back from Kilimanjaro. And sadly, he did die just before I left for my trip. But that's another story. And then my mum, who didn't have diabetes, but she climbed Kilimanjaro in 1963. She lived in Kenya until she met my dad and got married. And she climbed it on her 21st birthday. And again, so she was a complete source of inspiration. The conditions there were very, very different. That's her standing at the top of Kilimanjaro. The sign's just fallen over, wearing all kinds of borrowed kit. So yeah, so it was a bit of a challenge. This sign makes me laugh. So when you start the trip, you enter the national park at Kilimanjaro, there's a sign which gives you all kinds of dire warnings about things you shouldn't do. So don't climb if you've got a sore throat, or you've got any breathing problems, this, that, and the other. Which I thought was quite funny, because it doesn't mention anything about having type 1 diabetes, let alone not being able to see where you're going. So that made me laugh. This is me celebrating my birthday at 4,000 meters, three-quarters of the way up Kilimanjaro. And the guides made me a cake, incredibly, on some kind of, on a campfire. They made this incredible cake and brought it in. So that was very much celebrated. And obviously when you're climbing mountains, cake is very much acceptable. I mean, I've never really had too much of an issue with carb counting and traveling. I think because I've had diabetes since I was a kid, and I learned to carb count from, sort of day one. And so I'm very good at guesstimating things. And so I just guess the amount of carbs in unknown food and take insulin and then monitor and see what happens. So I know a lot of people struggle a lot more with that, but I just test and adjust a lot. So as I say, I had no issues. But obviously the kinds of foods you get on trek are quite limited. Just as challenging as actually climbing the mountain is with the conditions of wild camping on, let's say, this is three-quarters of the way up Kilimanjaro, negotiating rocks in the dark, especially when you're trying to go to the loo at night. That was the view I should have had. I actually didn't make the summit of Kilimanjaro. My eye hemorrhaged on the summit, halfway up the summit. I can't see in the dark. I really struggle to see in the dark. So this summit was really challenging, the summit night, because you start in about 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning in complete darkness. So I really struggled. And then my eye hemorrhaged, which can happen at altitude. So I really could see pretty much nothing. And then gradually I got worse and worse. I started really feeling the altitude. And I got three-quarters of the way to the summit on the summit night, and I had to go back down, unfortunately. My blood sugar then shot up to about 30 as well, just with the stress of the altitude. But I was fine. I got back down to the camp and was completely fine after a few hours. So I never quite made it to the summit, but one day I may go back. We'll see. So adventure travel then, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So I'm sure a lot of people resonate with this. I have this thing, I can do everything. I want to do everything, don't let anything stop me. And I very much try and keep this mentality. On the other hand, things can be really hard, and people don't appreciate how difficult it can be. Doing stuff with diabetes, even just going for a run with diabetes can be really challenging, getting your blood sugars right, let alone climbing mountains on the other side of the world, and figuring out, how many carbs are in your breakfast. Or in my case as well, with being visually impaired, just things like trying to find the loo in the middle of the night. And then there's all the worries about what happens if you have a hypo halfway up the mountain. There was me trying to, that's the loo, by the way, our little loo in the middle on the one of the camps climbing Kilimanjaro. So because I really can't see at night at all, I had to find someone to help me go to the loo in the night, which is always a bit challenging. So there's always kind of that nagging doubt. And I think something to remember is that no matter how confident everyone might appear, everyone has moments when they feel like they're a burden to others. And I think with diabetes, we often feel like, we might be a burden to other people. But as I say, and that's just in everyday life, let alone when you're halfway up a mountain or in the middle of the desert. And it's always worse when you're trying to be a serious adventurer and you're trying to claim that you can do everything that everyone else can. So there's always that issue. And if something does go wrong, it's kind of almost impossible to get over that fear of thinking of yourself as trouble. And this can really put people off doing, active stuff, because you think, well, if something goes wrong, people aren't going to want to have me around. So here's a little story of something that, again, happened to me. And it actually had quite dangerous consequences because I didn't ask for help and I was trying to cope myself. And especially if you don't notify the people of a problem. So this is the time a flapjack saved my life. We were on a very wet weekend scrambling in the lakes. I was with a group of people I didn't know. And I was really struggling with my blood sugar. It had been high most of the weekend, and I was putting in more and more insulin into my insulin pump. And then at some point it started crashing. It was pouring with rain the whole weekend. It was absolutely minging weather. It was cold, it was wet, we were all tired, exhausted. We were climbing the old man of Coniston. And I knew I needed to stop and sort my blood sugar. It just wasn't coming up. But I just kept going because everyone wanted to get to the top of this mountain. And eventually I realized that I was literally about to pass out. And the guy leading us said, "Are you all right, Di?" And I said, "No." And I pretty much, so we had to get out emergency shelter, and I pretty much collapsed into this shelter, semi-conscious. The leader, Will, who's now a very, very good friend of mine, and incidentally, has randomly now his son has got type 1 diabetes. He hadn't at the time, so he's learned a lot more about it ever since. So he actually called Mountain Rescue because we sat there in the shelter. I was semi-conscious, not really responding. And Will was basically feeding me flapjack, this super sweet flapjack, and I wasn't responding. Funny story as well is that after about half an hour of sitting there, and I was, say, not really responding, Will suddenly decided to count the group and realized that someone was missing. And he'd been so conscious of trying to look after me that he completely forgotten to actually check whether everyone else was there, and there was someone missing. So he had to go outside and have a look around, and thankfully he managed to find the other person who had claustrophobia and didn't want to sit in the emergency shelter, so had gone off to sit outside. But the interesting thing about this story was that everyone learned from it. As much as anything, everyone found out about how to call Mountain Rescue. We didn't need them in the end. We had them on standby, and eventually I was fine and we were able to walk down. But everyone learned a lot about type 1 diabetes. But I also learned a lot because I learned that, actually I should not be afraid to say, actually, I know it's cold and it's wet and minging and everyone wants to get on, but I need to stop and deal with this issue rather than just keep carrying on regardless. So it was a very good lesson. Another trip, this is a mountain biking holiday in Sardinia. Actually, I only had a minor blood sugar issue, which actually resulted in me, again, trying to continue and then falling off my mountain bike and breaking some ribs and smashing up my leg, which resulted in an interesting trip to a Sardinian hospital. Namibian desert. Oh yes, I told you about the boiled insulin already. I also had, I arrived in Namibia with no luggage. Thankfully, I'd put all my diabetes kit in my hand luggage, but I did arrive with no cycling kit at all. So I spent the first day with all kinds of borrowed kit and so on. So again, it was a very good lesson in making sure you have everything you need for at least the first couple of days in your hand luggage. It was very, very hot. It was about 40-something degrees. That's just some gratuitous picture of some Namibian wildlife. So we traveled around a game park as well. We had 2 weeks of cycling in the desert. Absolutely incredible trip. I'd highly recommend Namibia. We were very much in the middle of nowhere. Oh yes, and here's some via ferrata, which I've been doing a lot of in Italy. Actually, this is a great activity for people who are visually impaired because you're always attached to a rope. But again, I've had a few moments of low blood sugars and so on. Halfway up a rock face in precarious conditions. So again, something I've learned is always keep your hypo treatment handy. So I always try and think about the positive side. And the one thing you could say is that doing active and adventurous stuff and being diabetic means that we tend to have exciting lives. There's always something going on. culinary delights. So I also travel. I didn't say this. I travel a lot for work. Before the pandemic, I probably was traveling every other week. I was out of the country somewhere. I've just found out I've got to go to Cambodia in about a couple of weeks' time for a week for work. But again, traveling for work has its own challenges. And yes, interesting food. So I was at a conference in South Korea, and my friend said, I've just had kidney beans in custard. And I said, don't be ridiculous. You can't have had kidney beans in custard. And he said, I have. And so I said, oh, I've got to try this. So I did actually try kidney beans in custard, and various other very strange foods, abalone porridge and all sorts. So again, with the carbs, I mean, sometimes you've got absolutely no idea what's in a food, especially if you don't speak the language, as often no English. I just have to make an educated guess and just keep testing and adjusting as I go. And that tends to be my approach. So some things I've learned, as I say, don't worry about feeling like you need help, asking people for help. Helping other people is always part of being on a trip, and everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. So, you know, you should never, it can be really hard to be open about things like diabetes, but people actually genuinely are very, very happy to help if you need. And as I say, it's not a problem. It's worth telling people any critical information about your condition, just in case, even if nothing ever happens to you, they might. So if you're on a trip in the middle of nowhere, at least make sure someone knows, even if you don't want to talk about it. But I find these trips really good for actually educating people, and people generally are really interested to learn. So yeah, never feel like you're a burden to other people, but do make a backup plan for everything. People worry a lot about traveling and doing active stuff, and I'm the worst for this. I get quite anxious, and so I make sure that whatever the situation, I think it through and I think, right, what would happen if my pump failed? Backup syringes and insulin. What would happen if I ran out of hypo treatment and I'm on a trek in the middle of nowhere? And I think, okay, I've got, you know, this much sugar and gel and jelly babies and whatever. Someone is going to have, you know, some other stuff they can give me. In the camp supplies, they're gonna have sugar for the tea and coffee, you know, biscuits, whatever. There will be stuff. So, but always have a plan for what you would do. Could you get to a hospital? So how far are you going to be from a hospital, or how easy would it be to get yourself to a hospital by whatever means? Are you likely to be able to buy emergency insulin and syringes? I've left my insulin. I was once traveling in France and Germany. I managed to leave my insulin in a hotel fridge, and I arrived in France with no insulin. But I happen to know that you can buy insulin over the counter in France, or at least you could back then. I think you still can. And so I literally just went to an emergency pharmacy on a Sunday evening and managed to buy some insulin. Again, you know, what would you do about syringes? You know, would you be able to at least get to a hospital and find some syringes or insulin? What about blood glucose meter? So when I was in, oops. Sorry, my slide's just gone on. There we go. Yes, could you survive without a blood glucose meter? So what happens if your blood glucose meter breaks? I once had a blood glucose meter stolen in Italy when I was in Rome, and I was sat on a park bench eating my lunch, and I put it down next to me, and I think someone thought it was a wallet because it was in a case, and someone stole it. The answer is I went to a pharmacy and managed to, they didn't speak any English. I didn't speak any Italian at the time, but with sign language and whatever, I finally managed to persuade them to give me a glucose meter. And they actually gave it to me for free in the end with 50 test strips. I mean, I would have bought it, but she did give it to me for free when I explained the situation. I once forgot my blood glucose meter the day I went to do it, actually to go for the interview for the job that I now have and have had for the last 23 years. And I was living in Manchester at the time, and I came over on the train to Sheffield. I managed to forget my blood sugar meter. And my strategy for managing without a blood glucose meter all day was, and this is a kind of interesting strategy, but it worked, was to keep taking tiny bits of insulin until my blood sugar was low and I could tell it was low. And then I took some sugar and then I knew what level my blood sugar was because I knew it was just above hypo level. And so at that point, I knew what my level was because otherwise I would have no way of actually knowing. So yes, what would you do without a blood glucose meter? So do you need a spare? I mean, my strategy generally is if I can get somewhere where I could buy something like that, I don't bother taking a spare. Take a spare battery because it's easy to carry. But again, you can always get batteries in most places, unless you're in the middle of the desert. If you're somewhere remote where you're not going to have access to that, consider taking a spare. Same with my insulin pump. I take a spare insulin pump if I'm really somewhere remote and I really don't want to rely on something else. But, you know, if I could cope for a couple of days, if necessary, with backup syringes, then, you know, I don't worry too much. Oops. So airports and medical kit, a few tips. And again, everyone's very different in how they manage these kind of situations and risks. So and my attitude is quite different, I think, from Sandra's and Laura's. First of all, airports is a very easy places to have hypos because there's always a lot of walking, and I frequently end up having a hypo in an airport. So just something to be aware of. You end up walking around a lot. My strategy is to never volunteer any information about diabetes or kit unless they ask me specifically. As soon as you start telling them, I have diabetes, can I do this? Can I do that? What about this? People get antsy and it just causes more problems than it's worth. I literally say nothing unless they open up my bag and say, what's this? And I say, it's a syringe or it's an insulin pump. And that strategy works very well for me. As I say, everyone may have different attitudes on this. You know, if they say, do you have anything sharp in your bag? I just say no at that point because it's just too much hassle otherwise. And I find, I mean, I say I travel, before the pandemic, I was traveling every other week. I was flying pretty much. And I've flown, you know, all over the world. And this strategy has always worked very well for me. Personally, I take everything, I put everything through the X-ray machine, insulin pump, meter, sensors. I've never, ever had an issue in, I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of flights. I've never had an issue. You can refuse the full body scan if you want. I don't bother. I go through the full body scan with my pump on, with my sensor, and I've never, ever had an issue. It's not recommended, but I've never, ever had an issue. So I take that risk just because it's less hassle. Above all, though, make as little fuss as possible and you'll actually get through security an awful lot faster. So even if they ask stupid questions, which they probably will, they want to search you. People find it really embarrassing. They think everyone's looking at you, you're being searched, you're being taken off to a little cubicle. Smile, go with it, and you'll just save yourself an awful lot of pain. No one else could care less anyway. My insulin pump once had traces of explosives, apparently, according to the sensor, and a little alarm went off and things started flashing. I thought it was quite exciting, actually. A lot of people find that kind of thing really embarrassing, but I just thought it was quite exciting. And they took me off to a cubicle and, you know, searched me and they let me go in the end. It was fine. Always carry documentation about your medical kit, just in case. I've never been asked for it in more than 40 years of flying and hundreds of flights, but it's good to have it just in case. I would suggest making documentation as generic as possible so that if things change, you don't have to update it. So mine just says something like, this person needs to carry needles and diabetes related equipment in their bag because they have type 1 diabetes. And it doesn't specify because, as I say, otherwise you might have to keep changing it. I would pack at least a week's worth of your medical kit in your carry-on bag, if not all of it. Definitely all of your insulin. Oops, there we go. On the plane, so with the modern technology, things like sensors and so on, they always say that you shouldn't, you know, you should disconnect from Bluetooth and all the rest of it with your sensors. Ignore all that. It's perfectly safe to fly with your sensor connected to your phone or whatever. It really wouldn't be safe to fly if that was going to be an issue and someone forgot to do it. So again, just ignore any dire warnings about that. don't argue with a flight crew if you tell you to put it on Bluetooth, just say yes and then just ignore them, is my best advice. But again, this is my personal experience. One thing about insulin pumps that you might not know, takeoff and landing can affect the insulin flow in your pump. So I always disconnect during takeoff and landing, and then just prime some insulin, make sure you can see it coming through before you reconnect, just to be sure. Otherwise you can end up with highs or lows quite easily. It took me years of flying to realize why I was always going high after landing, and it was because the pressure was adjusting the flow of insulin in my pump. Another thing to do is don't leave your hypo treatment in the overhead locker, especially during takeoff and landing. I've done that before and then had a massive hypo, and when the seatbelt sign has been on, and not been able to get to my equipment. So make sure you actually have it with you rather than in the overhead locker. And then always carry, as Laura said, always carry plenty of snacks and water, just in case. You never know how long you might get stuck for. Again, I've been stuck on a train for 10 hours when it's broken down, and I had to say plenty of stuff with me, luckily. But yeah, always assume that. Time zones. So my strategy, everyone's different on this. My strategy is to think in the new time zone as soon as you get on the plane. And as I say, I've been all over the world. So I've been in, 12 hours and more, 15 hours of time zone difference. So what I found is the sooner your mind adjusts to new time zone, the sooner your body will. I change my pump settings, the time on my pump and everything, as soon as I get on the plane to the new time zone. And as I say, the quicker you do that, the quicker your body will respond, will get over the jet lag, and the quicker it will kind of settle into the new time zone. But just test frequently and be very, very watchful of issues, especially in the first 24 hours. That strategy works very well for me. Just go with how your body feels regarding timing of meals and snacks and so on. And just, as I say, take insulin as needed, even if it means you have lunch 3 times in a day or whatever. Just go with it. Try not to stress about it. Unless you sleep well on planes, which I don't. I sleep really badly on planes. I always try and arrive in the afternoon or the evening on a long haul flight, and then it'll be almost bedtime when you get there, and your body clock ends up adjusting more quickly, and you tend to have fewer issues with blood sugars. But yeah, just stress. Don't stress. Just go with the flow. So just some little bit of inspiration for you. So one of the things I do now as well is I help with a charity called Action for Diabetics. And this is a charity that helps to educate and support children with type 1 diabetes in Southeast Asia. So we set up clinics. We teach kids how to, we provide physical support for them in terms of testing equipment, insulin, and so on. But we also train them in how to kind of live a normal life with diabetes. And we train the diabetes educators, because vast majority of kids with type 1 diabetes in Southeast Asia just die. And so because of this, and because they don't always have access to equipment, there's no knowledge of what to do. So we've been, over the last few years, setting up these kind of things. And so we've run things like camps, which give them confidence to deal with type 1 diabetes and so on. But in particular, we teach them about things like being active, and how to deal with things like stigma, being active, how to manage, and to live a kind of normal life, because literally they feel like they're just going to die. And as part of this, so this is a guy called Jerry Gore. He's an incredible guy. He's a type 1 diabetic. He's a professional mountaineer, amongst many other things. And he is an incredible source of inspiration. I mean, he's done some incredible things. He does all these challenges. At the moment, he's in Costa Rica doing an incredible mountain biking challenge. This was one of example, is his trip in the French Alps, covering 445 miles, climbing 53,000 feet in 7 days. This on the left is Neve, at the time, this is a few years ago now, she was 6. She's she's been type 1 diabetic since she was birth. And she cycled 20 miles in the middle of winter across the Lake District, age 6, in the snow, to raise money for A4D. She's done many, many things ever since. But these are just 2 people who are incredible examples of people just not letting diabetes stop them traveling, doing active stuff, and doing the things they want to do. So to wind up then, in a nutshell, oops, sorry, that almost gone on the way. Diabetes is horrible. We know that. It can be a right pain in the bum. I mean, there's a daily challenge of just staying alive. And as we all know, I don't need to remind you, there's a daily challenge of, in the long term, worse things can happen. Losing your sight, as has happened to me, amputation, happened to my dad, kidney failure, and even death, as we know. So travel can be stressful even for non-diabetics, normal people, as I like to call them, let alone when you've got a serious medical condition like type 1 diabetes. But my main message, I guess, is don't let it stress you out. Don't panic. Just have a clear plan, and then have a backup plan and another backup plan if you need, and you're all set. And a lot of how you treat it will depend on your attitude to risk. So pack extra supplies, yes. Personally, because I do a lot of stuff where I might be trekking with just a backpack and I've got to carry everything I need for a week or more, I'm quite good at figuring out what I really can't do without. So, you know, what would I do if I didn't have my insulin pump? You know, do I need a spare insulin pump? Yes, potentially, if I'm somewhere where I can't get another one. Not necessarily if I'm somewhere where I could cope, or I could get another one sent to me within a couple of days. And you don't have to be quite as adventurous as me or Jerry. It's kind of whatever you make of it. So you can always start small and build up. Start with a small trip and build up to something bigger. Start with a small adventure, but don't let it put you off. That's my major take home message, if you like. And if you want to read more about some of my experiences of travel with diabetes and with sight loss, you can follow some of my adventures on my blog. That's it.
Thank you, Diana. You've led such a colourful life there.
I mean, I could keep telling stories for hours, but
I just moan about going to Barnsley. going to Mongolia, where I'm glad you enjoyed it. So I want to thank everybody, Sandra, Diana, Stuart, Laura, for giving us such a wonderful take on travel with diabetes. Yes, it can be quite challenging, I must admit. Trying to get things all in order for when you go away and make sure that you've got everything that you need. And that's just before you start with trying to remember to take your passport. So I have nightmares the night before I go away that I forget that. I get to the airport and I forgot my passport. It doesn't happen, but I must admit it's always there in my mind. Yep. So thank you, everybody, for giving such a lovely take on travel with diabetes, and I want to give you a special thanks for giving up your Saturday morning as well. So some of you are lucky, you've got sunshine, some of us aren't, but we'll get through the day together. All right, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And yeah,
thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, fantastic speeches.
Yeah. Yes, giving some of us a bit of inspiration there, I'm sure.
It was great. Thank you.
I was going to say, Di, could you possibly stop screen sharing so I can see
I'm just
all the
trying to
people
find
again?
out. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to find out where to. I've paused it, I think, but I can't. Ah, there's the stop button. I was trying to find it. There we go.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you, everyone. So now go out, have a stretch, toilet, dinner, but enjoy the rest of your weekend. Hi, David.
Stuart.
Hi, Margaret. Margaret,
Hi.
haven't seen you for a while.
No, it's lovely to see you.
Yes. Yes. Lindsay, you were asking Stuart something, is
Oh,
it?
yeah. I can just see Stuart's written and the Meadow Hall, and I wonder what do you mean? Like going to Meadow Hall is possibly like battling against ocean waves, but I wondered what did you mean?
Oh, did he mean that? Yeah.
Yeah, the Meadow Hall, Sheffield. You said Barnsley, Shirley. So and the Meadow Hall, that's always a bit of a hassle going through there.
Oh, yes, yes, I know what you mean. Yes.
So I know Sheffield quite well. So I know Emma, a friend of mine that used Taiwan, Emma Bradley. She lives in Sheffield. Yeah.
I don't go to Meadowall very often, I must admit. Barnsley twice a week, yes, but Meadowall.
Barnsley, I know Barnsley. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So do
referred
I
to-
now.
Can I
it's referred
ask?
to Meadow Hill, isn't it?
Can
Come on.
I ask Stuart something, please?
Yes.
Stuart,
Yeah.
I've been invited by my nephew to go to Spain. I have never travelled with type 1 diabetes before.
Okay.
Can you recommend an insurance company in Sheffield?
I would. I don't know Sheffield. I don't know Sheffield like brokers or anything like that. What I would do is probably go through Diabetes UK and see what insurance companies are around you.
Oh, one thing I meant to
Maybe
say.
worth giving some of the top insurance companies a call and having a look online as well for travel insurance.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
something I meant to say about travel insurance. So I get annual in travel insurance because it's just much easier. So I just renew it once a year. It covers me for all over the world. I've used Just Travel for about 10 years now. They've never loaded it for type 1 diabetes. And they always come up with quite competitive prices. I think I pay around £70 a year, something like that. And that covers all my travel, as I say. I also have for my active trips, I have membership of the Austrian Alpine Club, which gives you free, along with the membership, which is about £20 a year, you get insurance which covers rescue. So it doesn't cover your normal travel like luggage and so on with planes, but it will get you out. It will get you off a mountain by helicopter or whatever, in case of issues. So I have that on top. So that covers any like helicopter rescue or anything like that. But yeah, the standard Just Travel, as I say, have always managed to find me good insurance without loading the policies at all. So
So you recommend I go through Diabetes UK? Is that?
You go through there, yeah, go have a look on their website, have a look around the websites about travel insurance. I would probably, instead of doing a quote online, I'd probably give them a call, speak to the sales team.
Okay, thank you.
Go through. Spain is fine because a lot of people travel to Spain, so should be able to get covered for Spain as well. If you just get a policy, it's up to you if you want a policy for yourself or for your partner. It's up to you. So I can't advise which is the best one. It's up to you to decide which one is suitable for you. Okay, but I would shop around. No.
Yeah,
Margaret.
Laura.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. In Spain, the main difficulty is that the regular eating time for dinner is at about 10, 11 at night. If you're going as a tourist, you'll be able to eat at a time that suits you for your diabetes. So it shouldn't be a big problem. Spanish meals tend to be like tapas, so not as many carbs as you would normally maybe get in an average meal in a pub restaurant in Britain. So just bear that in mind, like calamar, I mean, it's deep fried squid. There's not a lot of carbs in something like that, but there are some, and the grease in like the greasy tapas may affect your insulin sensitivity a little bit. So watch out for that, but don't worry too much. I mean, I've traveled to Spain loads of times and it's not a huge difficult thing to deal with. It's harder if you're staying in a Spanish family. And then I treated merienda, which is the meal. It's like a little snack at about 5, 6 in the afternoon. I had a sandwich then, did my insulin at that time. And then the dinner that they have at 10, 11 at night, I treated as just a snack, because there weren't many carbs in it. But I mean, Pilar's from Spain, so she might also have some tips for you. I don't know, but she's on mute, so maybe she's not following at the moment. But yeah, good luck with your trip. Don't let it hold you back, the diabetes. You'll be fine. You should be anyway. And even if you go to hospital or whatever, you'll still get through it. Most people speak some English, so you should be fine.
I'm staying with family anyway, so
That's not so bad.
You'll be fine.
thank you.
Enjoy your trip, Margaret. Don't be put off.
Would you like to come with me, Shirley?
Oh, yes, I could do with a nice sunny break. Yeah. So, anybody else got any questions for our guest speakers? Don't think we've had much in the chat, because you've kept answering those as well.
Tried to, so I've just gone back through the chat. I think I've answered everything, but
Yes,
if I've missed anything.
yeah. Laura, you'll
Sorry,
get.
I
Is that,
just had
is that a legacy hand, or is it?
It's just a question that
yeah,
I
go on.
have for Sandra and Diana. I was wondering, I know Sandra's got a child, and have you got any children, Diana?
No, I haven't.
Okay, because I was going to ask about like pregnancy and travel with diabetes, or traveling with a young child when you're trying to deal with all your kit and dealing with that. I know your daughter's got type 1 as well, hasn't she, Sandra? But how did you manage like travel with a young child or during pregnancy? Did you manage okay? I'm not there yet, but you never know. Such things.
Yeah, I flew with her when she was about 1 year old. I was going to France, and I got a special lightweight bag that was stuffed with nappies and glucose and diabetes equipment. It was in the days before blood glucose monitors, though. So as Diana said, things were much simpler then. And it went on the back of a pushchair. So yeah, you coped. She now has diabetes as well, and a child, and has travelled with her. The child is
My niece, both her son and daughter were type 1 diabetics, and she used to take them all over. They've been to Florida and places like that, but she's very sort of organised. So, you know, everything was in its place. She got all the medical certificates that she needed to get, and all the insulin that she needed, and she always used to have emergency backpacks. So yes, and a daughter has now had 2 children. So yeah, she's now a grandmother.
Yeah, Diana was right. It's just thinking ahead and being organised. So.
Yeah, you were well looked after, Laura. So hopefully that's something to think about. Brenda, yes.
Yeah, somebody, I can't remember who said it earlier about your monitor. Mine's a Libra 2, but I presume it affects all of them. Can be damaged. Going through x-rays and such like. Would that be permanent damage, or does it just affect it for a while and things? And what about the sensors? Can they be damaged?
So I've never had an issue with them. I mean, they always say, because all the tech companies are on the side of caution. So there is a very small risk, that something could be damaged. And it probably would be, potentially it could be permanent damage. But as I say, I've never had an issue, and there's no one from a pump company here, so I can say it. If my pump stopped working as a result of going through the thing, I would just claim it on the guarantee and say, and I wouldn't tell them that I went through the sensor. I would just say, well, pump's not working.
Should watch what you say with Stuart.
Not about insurance.
Keep it to yourself.
Yeah, I took my pump off once by mistake and put it through the scanner. That was with a Medtronic pump, but it didn't do anything. So it's the big green one with a body scanner, which is the worst one. The first one's a metal detector.
Yeah,
and I use the same thing. I use the same thing at work. So it's the big body scanner. So if you have on the Libre sensors or Dexcom or on a pump, ask them, say, I've got this. They'll just put it to one. Say, they do one of these swab things. They'll swab it. That's what they need to know. If it's not, if it's anything else, if you've got to do like a strip search or body search, maybe just go behind the screen, get a female or stuff just to do that. If there's any questions after that, that's a little bit worse. But but hopefully you shouldn't just go through that, because at the end of the day, you want to get people through as quick as they can, but make sure everybody's safe to travel.
Yeah, it depends on your attitude to
Yeah,
these things. And so
exactly.
I
I would
operate with a slight bit of risk just for the
Yeah.
ease. Of
It
doing
also
it, but-
depends, you can assess it in economic terms, like if you know how much the equipment costs. I know Sandra said before her pump equipment is worth a few thousand,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you wouldn't necessarily take that risk. With my Libra 2 sensors, to buy them in Belgium cost me 80 to 100 euros for 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
if I'm carrying one sensor with me, I might run the risk of it going through the bag scanner, even though I shouldn't. But I
Yeah.
do find it makes the results more erratic rather than giving a smooth curve on the graph, is my experience. I mean, again, you might have different
I've
experiences.
never had an issue with that, but
Okay, do you use Libra 2, Diana?
Yeah, but with
Okay,
both Libra 1 and Libra 2, never had an issue.
okay.
But, yeah, I mean, I do
Mine
wonder
goes
if
up,
it-
down,
if
up,
it-
down, up, down all the time when
Yeah.
it's actually doing more like this. And I
Yeah.
know that from
Interesting.
finger
Yeah.
pricking. So watch it. I mean, it's probably
Yeah.
better to avoid if you're
Yeah,
being cautious.
yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
it's
follow the tagline. But
Right.
up to you.
I'm afraid I really need to go.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Yes, yeah, and enjoy your next trip, wherever that may be.
Cambodia in a couple of
Oh,
weeks.
Cambodia. Well, there
Yeah.
you go. Yeah,
So there we go.
you're a bit like my nephew. He's been to the Philippines working. He's come home. He's in Wales, and then he's going to Chile. So yeah.
Cool. Okay.
But
Cheers,
thank
guys.
you, everyone.
Bye.
So we'll bring the meeting to a close and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. So bye.